Good morning, boys and girls. How are you doing today? Pal's just shooting a little dart to keep himself occupied. Almost had a bullseye there. Anyway, hopefully you guys are keeping yourselves occupied, doing, smart things, not dumb things, at least not too many dumb things. Just want to talk a little Civil War here with you here for a brief moment. I think we need that on. So, just kind of a quick rundown on the states. I think I don't want to get too far ahead of things, and we didn't get the basics of the states and who's on what side and stuff like that, because I know we're starting to get into Manassas, Bull Run, some of the first battles and things like that. And with the Civil War, there's really a lot of stuff. It can get confusing pretty quickly. Well, we'll start with the southern states, or the rebel states first. The Confederacy, as it was known. This state's always kind of easy to pick out, Florida. But as you go north up along the eastern seaboard, you got Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. I drew Outer Banks in there in case you guys like to go to Outer Banks for, your vacation or whatever. VA is Virginia. It's kind of got these little finger kind of things that stick out in that big bay there, Chesapeake Bay. Tennessee and Alabama are in there. Mississippi's in there. Louisiana's in there. Arkansas and Texas are also Confederate states too. I attached a better map onto the classroom just so you guys don't have to look at just my junky drawing here. There's a really good detailed and colorized map on there. With the Union states, all the New England states like Massachusetts and all them, they're Union. New York, PA, we were Union. New Jersey, Delaware, also Union states. Then as you go out through the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, they were Union states as well. Kansas, kind of a newer state, was also a Union state, and there was a lot of controversy in the lead up to the war with whether that's going to be a slave state or not a slave state and so on. California and Oregon are also new states at the time. They jump in and become states, and they also were on the Union side in the war. And look, California's kind of far south. I mean, California could have been maybe a southern state technically, but they didn't want to be, so they sided with the Union. Then you've got a couple of these other guys. Maryland, West Virginia, Kentucky, Missouri. Maryland, they weren't really sure what side to be on. They kind of had some problems because they weren't really sure if they were going to be a northern state or southern state. Sometimes they would have big riots and people would attack, with sticks and stones and stuff like that. Union soldiers going to their duty stations in the South. So Maryland was one of those kind of confused sort of states. John Wilkes Booth, the guy who shot Abraham Lincoln, is from Maryland, right? So Maryland is also right next to Washington, D.C. If I get my little pen out, Washington, D.C. is right about here, really. Just draw a big fat dot there. That little dot is Washington, D.C. But since Washington, D.C. is sandwiched between Virginia, a southern Confederate state, and Maryland, a state that's not sure, Abraham Lincoln took pretty harsh measures in Maryland. If you were fooling around in Maryland, you might just get thrown in jail. I know in America you're supposed to have a trial and be charged with a crime and everything like that, per the Bill of Rights and all that stuff. But in a time of war, and it was a serious crisis, Lincoln just threw people in jail sometimes. If you were talking bad about the Union, he might just throw you in jail. I know, he seemed like a nice guy, but he was taking very tough measures, especially with Maryland. The other border states are West Virginia. I just wrote WV right there. They split off from regular Virginia. Regular Virginia became a slave state in the Confederacy, and West Virginia, it's kind of different culturally. They're up in the mountains, coal mines, small farmers, stuff like that. Not like the big kind of plantation sort of culture that you would see in the main part of Virginia. So those guys split off and became a Union state. Kentucky was a border state. Abe Lincoln wasn't really too hard on those guys like he was on Maryland. He was kind of trying to coax them to stay with the Union. Missouri, was another state that had a lot of confused fighting back and forth in it. A lot of Confederate people in there, pro-Confederate people in Missouri. All right, so Missouri's kind of split as well. So that's kind of a rundown of your states there. Now, if you're the president, you're President Lincoln. What's your plan? How are you going to go in and get these guys? You're right here in Washington, D.C. Richmond is kind of down here, where this big fat dot is right next to the A in Virginia. I mean, the two capitals are maybe less than 100 miles apart, maybe closer to 90 miles apart. So you can tell a lot of fighting's going to go on here. But do you just go down and invade the capital? How do you approach this? Well, they came up with this thing called the Anaconda plan. I'm going to switch my screen here, as it were. And here's the Anaconda plan. Also, I attached this as a map onto the classroom, so you guys have a better view of it than this one, because you can see the ink in my printer's not going, not really too good anymore. But the Anaconda plan is so named because it's sort of this big snake that strangles you, like a constrictor type snake that strangles you. All right. The Anaconda plan is devised by a guy named Winfield Scott. Winfield Scott is the top Union general when the war breaks out, but he's a really old guy. He's like old, he's overweight. He's not going to be really a field commander that goes out and leads troops and stuff like that. He's sort of past his prime. The Mexican-American War was kind of like his heyday, and that was like, 20-some years earlier. So he comes up with a plan, and basically, you can see our Anaconda goes through the ocean here, and it's all around the Gulf states and up the Mississippi River. And he was going to use the Navy and, in the middle states, use the Army, but basically strangulate and squeeze the life out of the Confederacy. So that's his plan. So some good stuff that comes out of this, or pluses, is the Union has a strong Navy. They can do it. They don't have enough ships right now at the beginning of the war. They're going to have to build up to that, but the South has virtually no Navy. So in that capacity, it should benefit the Union. It can work, but there's a certain drawbacks to it as well. Over underneath my minus sign here, I would say time. It takes a lot of time. People want results. They want fireworks. They want these glorious battles where there's heroes and people are validated for their courage and stuff like that in the middle of these battles. But this doesn't seem like that cool. The newspapers aren't going to get good newspaper articles out of the Anaconda plan. It's kind of boring, all right? So it takes a lot of time. It lacks, I guess, kind of the fireworks people are looking for at the beginning of the war. Right, fireworks there. So people wanted to see that stuff, explosions and charges and cavalry duels with sabers and everything like that. So basically that is what they did do, and eventually it did work. It just took predictably, it took a long time. They had to build up to it, and eventually it pretty much prevailed at the end. Here's Manassas, the Battle of Manassas, or first Bull Run. Yes, there was a second Bull Run. The Confederates won both, basically. First Bull Run. The Union is going to come down, and they're going to spank these Confederates. That's their plan. They're just going to roll through and kind of forget about the Anaconda plan. This is early in the war. They think they're just going to walk down, cover that 90-mile or so distance to Virginia, and beat those rebels. One of the things they want to accomplish on the way there is they want to take over a railroad junction. Like we mentioned, I think, maybe 2 classes ago. Railroads are a new technology. They're going to be very important in the war for transporting the soldiers and the material, food, supplies, all kinds of stuff that you need to run a war. So they want to take over a railroad junction. Um, the Confederates catch wind of this, and they're going to try and stop them. So the commanders for this were General Irvin McDowell for the North, and 2 generals, Generals Beauregard, and it was probably a hard name to read, sort of like a French type name, General Beauregard, and General Joseph Johnston for the South. I listed them both. It was basically Beauregard's plan and Joe Johnston's, I guess, mostly army. Joe Johnston was really in charge, but Beauregard was kind of the man on the scene. Union strength, they had about 35,000 guys. The Confederates in the South had about 33,000. Despite that, they still won. The Union lost just under 3,000 soldiers, and the South had about just under 2,000 casualties. So the Union was defeated. The South was victorious. A little earlier, we were talking about the way weapons had evolved, especially the rifle, the mini ball, stuff like that. Rifles were getting more advanced, and part of that, and part of the usage of rifles, it allowed untrained armies. Both these armies were untrained. They were not experienced, really top effective fighters yet. They were both pretty green, pretty untested, and very amateurish in their approach to training and going into combat and stuff. But in that kind of scenario, that benefits the defender. I mean, think about what you're doing if you're defending a town or a railroad junction or a hill or a piece of, some piece of geography. You kind of just, maybe you dig some holes, set up some barriers and stuff like that, and you kind of just sit and hide behind them and just shoot at who's coming at you. I mean, it's very oversimplified, I suppose, but that's what you do in defense. In offense, these soldiers are marching, and think of it almost as if you're driving a tank or something. That commander or that general is sort of driving that column of soldiers, and when they start to encounter an enemy, they have to come online and get into different positions and stuff like that. Almost like the way you see football teams rehearse plays over and over again with the quarterback and the running back and wide receivers and linemen and stuff. So they have to rehearse that a lot, and the Union Army hadn't really gotten to that level of expertise yet. So it was kind of fated, I guess, that the South would win that in that sort of scenario. As the battle opened up, it looked like the Union might win. They had they had flanked the South. They were coming across the side of the Southern Army. So the Southern Army's, kind of aligned like this. Like maybe that's their lines facing out this way, so that they could shoot at some Union soldiers coming. They were getting flanked kind of early on in the battle, meaning a hidden Union army had sort of come around and it's coming through this way, in this direction, and kind of rolling up the side and shooting those guys up and everything. So it wasn't going real well. But a guy who's going to make his big debut in this battle is down here. I wrote his name. Stonewall Jackson comes in and kind of saves the day for the South. So in the end, with the Union losing, it's got a huge effect on morale. The Union is very bummed out. They lost. The Confederacy won, so they're really pumped, and they feel really great about their army and their country and everything. This guy also is going to enter the fray. This General McClellan. He's a young general for the North. He's a U.S. general. He's for the USA. He's an American general, not a Confederate general. But he's going to replace Irvin McDowell. Irvin McDowell failed. He lost the battle, so he's going to get kicked out. McClellan's going to get put in. He had won one battle earlier in the very brief war, like a very small battle. This is the first major battle. it didn't go well for the North, so they want a change of leadership. So they bring in this guy George McClellan, and then in the South you've got this Stonewall Jackson guy. He's sort of a rising star. He's someone who's going to start getting a lot of attention here in the next few years and over the next battles and stuff that we look at here. Okay, so that's basically everything I wanted you guys to get out of it. The Anaconda plan, the good, the bad of it, what it was. Maybe some of the statistics for Manassas. I left that in the early packet of notes that I had sent out to you earlier. You can just kind of go through and just, I guess, copy the stuff in if you're following along. And really the effects of this battle were kind of far-reaching. It sort of signaled that this is going to be a little more of a war than just the time that elapses between walking between Washington D.C. and Richmond. It's going to be a little bigger than that. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye. Stay healthy.